What this whole framework seems to be intended to do is to siphon power away from opposition parties.
Yeah, why would you need an opposition party if you can just ram through legislation really, really fast? Frank Baylis finally made an appearance on CPAC today. He took a rather strange approach in his opening remarks. He didn't talk about the carbon tax, homelessness, affordability, crime, or even fiscal responsibility. Instead, he opened with, well, term limits for politicians.
Let's take a look.
So today I'm happy to pronounce and give to you our government reform plan. We're going to put government back to work for Canadians. And this is a 3-point plan that is going to have government working. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to limit the terms of both senators and members of parliament. The second step is that we are going to redistribute the power that's been concentrated in the offices of the leaders of the different parties, and we're going to give it back to the Speaker of the House, we're going to give it back to the members of parliament, and we're also going to give some of that power to the citizens of Canada. And finally, we're going to introduce a second chamber, and this is going to make the government far more productive. So, our first point, the setting of term limits. Our system was not designed for professional politicians. What we need is for people to come to Canada, come to Ottawa, use their expertise to contribute to the debate, and then move on and leave space for new Canadians to come and take their place. And this will bring a diversity of knowledge and expertise into our decision making. And therefore, MPs will not be eligible to run again after they have passed the 10-year mark of being elected. They will not be fired, but after 10 years, they will have to sit out a prolonged period before they can become a candidate again. As for senators, they would be limited to one 10-year period.
Okay, this is hurting my head, Frank. While it's not a bad idea to look at some of these things, the fact that you're coming out with this first when you're announcing your policy framework indicates that this is the first priority for you. So what this says to Canadians is that I don't care if you can't afford anything. I don't care if you're homeless. I don't care about immigration. I don't care about crime. And I don't care about how much the previous Liberal government spent. We are needing to look at term limits.
Well, with the senators, one could argue that they already have a term limit, and that limit is the age of 75 that they have to go into retirement. So that's the first thing. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with a more fixed term limit for senators because they are unelected. It might be wise to have a term limit of 10, maybe 15 years for senators. I don't know. It's honestly not a policy that I've given much thought to previously. But when it comes to the politicians, the MPs, honestly, I don't think term limits are appropriate in this case because it's the people who choose.
Right. Their term limit is actually dictated by the voters.
Right. So if you have an MP who is doing fantastic work in their community, who is really a pillar of that community, and they are great with their constituents, and they go and they fight hard for them in Ottawa, you have this imposed term limit saying, well, you can't go past 10 years. It doesn't matter how great you are at your job, you can't go past 10 years. That I don't agree with, because I think that people really do set the term limits. If you have an awful MP, you're not going to vote for that person again. If you have a fantastic MP, you're going to keep voting for that person. I mean, let's think of some of the MPs that we know. Our former neighbor, David Sweet, I think he was in office for 15 years and he did a phenomenal job. Dean Allison in Beamsville, he does, again, a phenomenal job. I think he's been in office for almost 20 years. Pierre Poilievre, same thing. He's been in office for about 20 years. Like, you have these fantastic MPs who really have earned the respect of their community. And I don't think it's fair to kick them out after 10 years because, well, that's what we've decided is the arbitrary number. If these MPs, if their term has expired, the people will let them know, right?
Well, and this is the thing, right? Term limits make sense for leaders, right? So that's where it makes sense, because within Canada, the people don't decide the leaders, the party decides the leaders. So does it make sense to have term limits for prime ministers? Yeah, it does. Just like it makes sense for term limits in the States for their presidents. So does it make sense for a prime minister to only have a 10-year term? Yep.
Well, and you could argue that after that 10-year term, they're no longer leader, but they go back to being an MP. And if their community has decided that they deserve to sit as an MP, then they will continue to do so. So that I would agree with.
Now, in most cases, if you're a prime minister, you're probably not going to want to go back to being, a backbencher MP or something like that. You'll probably want to retire and move on, and that's fine. But when you're looking at people that are elected to represent their community, that's a different ballgame. So term limits for the senators, you could argue that would be a good compromise to elected senators, because what that would do is that would allow much more movement within the Senate. When new governments take over, there's going to be a lot more senators for them to actually cycle out to be able to actually implement their mandate. So sure, you can make that argument. But again, I come back to the original point. With everything going on in Canada right now, even the tariffs, Frank, this is your priority. Okay.
Now, point number 2. The concentration of power in the hands of party leaders has led to a serious degradation in our debates and our ability to get work done. Therefore, we're going to redistribute their power. Our system was designed to promote robust debate among different voices so as to get the best policies put forward. Unfortunately, with the concentration of power, Parliament has become gridlocked and unable to get work done. So, we will take power from party leaders and give it back to the Speaker of the House, the MPs, and the citizens of Canada. The Canadian system is a Westminster system. However, we are the only system in the world that uses the Westminster system where the Speaker does not get to decide who speaks. That power has been consumed by the party leaders. So we're going to take it from them and give it back to the Speaker of the House. With respect to members of Parliament, they will be freed to do what they were sent to do, which is to represent their constituents. So we're going to free their voices to allow them to speak up when they should, and they are representing their constituents. This is a representative democracy. And finally, we're going to use the electronic petition system to allow Canadians to bring debates into the House of Commons. Petitions that garner more than 75,000 signatures will then be debated in Parliament.
I don't understand what he means by because of the party leaders having power, that means that debate is gridlocked. He seems to be targeting that towards the opposition parties.
Well, if the Liberals don't hand over the documents, yeah, things are going to get gridlocked. That was the Speaker's choice, to be fair.
And to also be fair, that gridlock allowed almost every single member of the Conservative Party to actually speak. So I would argue that that actually was a good thing. Literally every single Conservative MP spoke multiple times.
I'll be honest, I'm not sure what point Frank is trying to make, because I don't see this as a current problem within Parliament. I think that in question period, for example, you want the person to speak whose portfolio it is. So often you are getting responses from the ministers or the parliamentary secretaries who are responsible for those files. And you have these shadow ministers or shadow deputy ministers asking the questions that pertain to their file. I mean, Wednesdays were different, where Trudeau had said, well, I will stand up and I will answer all of the questions. That was his choice as leader. I think it's important for Canadians to see how their prime minister answers questions. So again, I don't really know what Frank's getting at, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the problem is currently. The other thing that he had mentioned was the petitions, that any petition with 75,000 signatures or more will automatically be debated in the House of Commons. This I find interesting, but let me tell you guys how difficult it is to get a parliamentary petition up to those numbers. Our petition was a 30-day petition and amassed about 60,000 signatures. And it was I believe it was the 7th largest, if I'm not mistaken, in our current parliament. So that goes back to the election in 2021 to present. And it was the 7th largest. So there was only 6 that were above 60,000. I don't even know if they were all above 75,000.
So there was 5 above 75,000.
Okay, there you go. Ryan knows. So, I mean, that is a very high threshold. I don't disagree with this premise. I think it's very interesting, but I think it would be very difficult for Canadians to reach that threshold, and perhaps a more efficient way to have their matters debated in the House of Commons is to contact their MP directly.
Well, so here's a few things. If I'm objective about this, and I believe that Frank's motives are pure, then what he's essentially saying is, well, people elect their members of parliament to the House of Commons, and they want to see their member of parliament speak in the House of Commons. Well, the leaders of the parties get to decide who stands up in the House of Commons, who reads debates, who reads statements, and all of this. And, while they no doubt try to make efforts so that everyone gets to speak eventually, when you are looking at holding a government to account, you are looking at doing so strategically, most effectively. You're looking at it as a team. So, you're not going to put your third string batter up to the plate going against their ace pitcher when you need to actually hit a home run.
And I just want to point out really quickly that in terms of the statements to members, which happen right before question period starts, each member has a certain number of spots that they're allotted throughout the parliamentary session. I honestly don't know how many it is, but I know that there's a set amount that each person gets within the House. So they do all share the time equally.
Yeah, they just... the leader gets to choose, when they go.
But not many Canadians watch the statements to members. It's right before question period. It usually happens at 2:00 during the week and 11:00 on Fridays. But again, if Canadians aren't watching, then it may not be familiar to them.
Right. So the next part that he's talking about is the petitions. Sure, debate the petitions, but to what end is my next question? Because if it's not legislation, if it's not a bill, sure, you can debate it, but then what?
Then what? Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
So the problem is well, petitions, if they, achieve more than 75,000 signatures, they're obviously important to Canadians. So let's just acknowledge that.
For sure.
But is it worth setting aside hours and hours of debate within the House of Commons over and above government business, opposition bills, private member bills, etc., that are actually going to make changes to the country? I don't know, unless you put some new sort of framework in the petitions that if it's debated and then that leads to a piece of legislation, maybe it's a private member. Like this seems a little haphazard, but it's an interesting proposition. I just don't think it's fully cooked yet.
Finally, the third part of my plan to reform government is to do with a second chamber. We will introduce a second chamber for debate into the House of Commons. A second chamber allows government business and legislation to move faster through the system. You have to think of it as a two-way highway. The main debates will still take place in the House of Commons. However, uncontested business such as petition presentations, member statements, members' motions, and the like will take place in the second chamber. This will have a very positive impact on the productivity of the government. I should note that Australia has had one for over 30 years, and the United Kingdom has had one for over 25 years. So, this will modernize our government.
Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. Number one, we're already in a bicameral system, which means we have the House of Commons and we have the Senate, the two houses, right? And number two, you don't necessarily want bills to go through quickly. You want them studied, you want them scrutinized, you want them given the proper attention that they deserve before they become law.
Right. So, and what this whole framework seems to be intended to do is to siphon power away from opposition parties. That's what this seems like it's intended to do.
Well, yeah, why would you need an opposition party if you can just ram through legislation really, really fast?
Well, you ram it through, you're letting the speaker, who is under the control of the government, the speaker gets to decide who speaks.
Right, because remember, the speaker, although they're supposed to be nonpartisan, typically they were elected as a member of the party of the government.
And, you have Greg Fergus, need we say any more? So, what if that speaker decides to only choose all the backbenchers of the opposition parties to speak? Now you have some pretty weak politicians actually standing up to hold the government to account. That's a problem. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
And it actually removes the democratic right of the opposition to actually hold the government to account effectively.
Right, because we need to think of the government and the official opposition as teams. They want to put their best players forward, and when you put the best players forward, you get the best results for Canadians. So you don't necessarily want the speaker choosing who gets to talk.
Right. So that should be in the hands of the parties, of the party leaders, and that's where they have their House leader inform them on that strategy, and it all comes into play as they're trying to hold the government to account, just as the government should get to choose who is going to be speaking. So, and as for the second chamber, no.
We already have two chambers. We have the House of Commons and we have the Senate.
So, maybe this guy needs to be in Parliament for more than 10 years to understand our system a bit better before he comes with recommendations. But just saying. Okay, well, that's that. Let's see what else he has to say.
Baylis, welcome back to Ottawa.
Thank you.
Just on your term limits, if you were to be elected as leader and come back to Parliament, presumably, would you have 6 years left to your term limit? Like, how would that work?
What would work is once you've hit the 10-year mark, because we can have minority governments and majority governments, after you've hit the 10-year mark, you might still be a member of Parliament, so you're not going to lose your job. But the next election, you would not be allowed to run unless you've stepped out for a prolonged period, which would be to be debated. But it would most likely be in the order of 10 years. What I'm trying to do here is deprofessionalize the political class. I don't want professional career politicians. We want people that have expertise, whether it's people that are in the mining field, whether it's medical doctors, lawyers, business people, engineers like myself, I'm a professional engineer, that come to Ottawa, contribute, use their expertise, and then make space for people with other ideas in that.
But you served for 4 years already, so would you be allowed to serve another 10 consecutive years? Like how?
No, it's not necessarily 10 consecutive years. So it's once you've done your 10 years, you're out.
Okay, so the problem he's trying to solve is
To keep Pierre out of office. That's what it seems like to me. I mean, like career politicians. How long do you have to be in office to be a career politician? People like to bandy this word about, but
apparently
nobody...
it's 10 years.
Yeah, I guess Frank is putting a limit on it. It's 10 years, right? But okay, let's look at some of the conservatives that we currently have who are they've had previous careers and now they've decided to be politicians, and they're really good at what they do. Like, let's take a look at Dr. Stephen Ellis, who was elected in 2021, and he is a physician, like he's a medical doctor, and now he's the minister or shadow minister of health. He will be minister of health very soon, I suspect. And let's look at Larry Brock. He was elected in the same year, 2021, and he was a defense attorney and then a crown prosecutor, and he's going to be Canada's next attorney general and minister of justice, and he's already done 4 years, right? So what, we're going to kick him out in 6 years? I don't think so. He's the best man for the job.
Well, and consider this, folks. Michael Barrett would be just about ending his time. That would be a massive loss for Canadians in terms of what he brings to the table. Like, and Pierre, people may like him, people may hate him. He was an absolute beast of a politician holding people to account.
He sure was.
Like, and you need a mix of people in Parliament, okay? You need some of the career politicians. Why? You may not like that they're career politicians, that they're there for most of their adult lives, but here's the good thing about them. They get to know that system inside and out.
Well, I mean, look at Andrew Scheer. He's a genius with process, right?
Yeah.
You need people like that on the team, and you only get that by learning and by doing. I mean, we've been doing this channel for 2 years, and we have like maybe a fraction of the knowledge in terms of policy and procedure that man does. And you need somebody who's just been immersed in it for many, many, many years to be able to know the system inside and out.
Well, look at the number of times that Andrew Scheer leveraged his knowledge as speaker, which was many, many years ago, might I add, to help the Conservatives, to hold Greg Fergus to account. Like, that wouldn't have been there.
Right. You need people like that. So to kick them out after 10 years because you've decided on some arbitrary number, I don't agree with that.
Well, and this is coming from a single-term politician, by the way. He's only been elected for one term, 4 years. And then his constituents decided that his term limit was up because they didn't vote him in again. So, this just seems like sour grapes at this point to me from Frank Baylis. But anyhow, continuing on.
Just, if I may, I just have another question on fundraising, because I know Karina Gould this morning, she was very critical of the fundraising goals the party has set. And she said, and I quote, speaking of the party, they have tried to make it as hard as possible for only a few candidates to participate in this race. Do you agree with her, and do you think you will meet those goals?
I can't speak for Karina Gould. I'm going to meet all the goals. I understand the party. It's in a very difficult position. This is a very condensed race. We have a very short time period. We're facing an election very quickly afterwards, and we have a gentleman south of the border that's shooting at us all the time. So it makes it for a very stressful time, but I respect what the party's doing, and we're going to work within the confines of the rules that the party's laid out.
Oh, what a surprise. Where's my surprise Pikachu face? Karina Gould is having problems raising money. So sounds like she's readying her excuse to be able to drop out. And then, I wonder who she's going to throw her support behind everybody.
But we said this would happen, remember? We said that this is not uncommon in leadership races as well as in leadership or races at the EDA level, like nomination races, that a whole bunch of people sign up, they get disqualified for various reasons, or they can't raise the money, or they don't have enough volunteers, or whatever it happens to be, that only a few will make it to the actual ballot.
So... But we also surmised one of Brian Lilly's theories that we found to be very credible, which is Karina Gould as being a stalking horse for Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney and siphoning some votes away from Chrystia Freeland. Now, it's going to be a little early for her to drop out, but I think she's going to stick around for a little longer to try and get some more support, and then once she's garnered enough support, she'll probably try and pivot all of that over to Mark Carney, just to guarantee that he actually, gets over the finish line ahead of Chrystia Freeland. But this is so strange that Frank Baylis is positioning himself as a serious tender. But he says, well, you'll get my economic plan later. Hello?
It's because he doesn't have one right now.
Well, allegedly he does, but the only thing I can think of from a strategic point of view is he's trying to introduce a conversation that the other candidates aren't talking about yet. That's to try and differentiate himself, because he needs to come up with something that nobody else is saying and nobody else is talking about.
Well, he's not one of the big names. How do you differentiate yourself in a race where you have the media seemingly pushing for Mark Carney, and then you have cabinet ministers like Chrystia Freeland and Gould? Like, how do you make yourself stand out?
Well, and this is probably the way. And the other, I think, angle to this is he's unofficially saying, I'm an anti-establishment politician. I'm an anti-establishment prime ministerial candidate, meaning I'm not one of the bad politicians. I'm one of the good politicians, because I'm trying to take power away from them. So that's probably what he's kind of unofficially saying. But I think it's also a dig at Freeland and Gould, because I think they've both been elected in 2015. Yeah, for over 10 years.
Yeah,
it'll be
so
over
there's
10
your
years.
10-year limit.
So good luck with that. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Baylis, your other prime ministerial candidate, finally making his debut on CPAC, and his main election platform to secure votes and win the prime ministership of Canada and the Liberal Party leadership of Canada is term limits. Good luck.